Welcome to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Matthew Thomas from Florence PD in Arizona. He has 32 years experience in law enforcement. Really looking forward to this conversation. I've actually known Chief Thomas for a while and he has some really incredible insights and um, a really unique approach to wellness. So welcome to the show, Chief Thomas. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, and it's good to see you again, Paige.
Yeah, it's good to see you. I, you are the first person from Arizona.
Yeah,
Isn't that so weird? I'm from obviously Phoenix from
right.
Arizona. I've interviewed now over 100 chiefs across the country. You are my first from my home state.
That's awesome. Good. I'm glad
Yeah,
to be the first there. That is kind of weird that you're from Arizona and I'm the first one, but I'm glad to be the first one.
you're representing. I love it.
That's it. That's it.
So you and I have known each other for a little while, and we have some like mutual friends that have been instrumental in my life and you came recommended. Obviously I know you, but you also came recommended for this podcast because of the really good things that you're doing in wellness. So I'm looking forward to our conversation, but I was hoping that maybe you could give us a little bit of background and we can go all the way back to life before law enforcement. What did your
Oh my
childhood
gosh.
look like?
I don't even know if I can remember that far back. I tried to wipe the hard drive. Childhood was unique, I think, comparatively, when I talk to other people that did not grow up like I grew up. I grew up in a half broken, half put together family. And so my mom's side of the family was all pretty stable. Like everybody was, my mom and dad's side were both kind of stable, but my mom and dad were not stable. So they got divorced at a very young age. My mom was very determined to make it on her own. And while we lived close to my grandparents and they would offer a lot of support, my mom chose to go out on her own. And so we lived in Section 8 housing in the south side of Phoenix, and it was South Mountain Avenue and First Avenue for any of the Phoenix people. That's about as south as you can get. And so I grew up with one side of the family. I was around my mom's side of the family the most. Very stable hunting, fishing, family get-togethers, that type of stuff. But on the flip side of that, when mom wasn't around, because she's a single mom working a job, sometimes working a couple jobs or working overtime, and so I grew up sometimes. I was a latchkey kid, right? And that was kind of the thing then. I would come home from school, nobody would be home. She'd be at work or she'd be sleeping. And I grew up with gangs all around. And it was a Hispanic neighborhood primarily. So, primarily Hispanic gangs. But some of my friends that I went to school with were from different gangs. And that's a whole unique piece of it as well because you grow I grew up with friends, right? We played soccer together, we played basketball together, but then as we get into our preteens, in that area, when you're in your preteens, that's when you start getting involved in the gang activity, the criminal activity. So as we were in our preteens, some of my friends were from one gang because they were from a couple neighborhoods over. Some of my friends were from another gang. Sometimes those gangs didn't get along, so you had to navigate all that with your friends. And before I was a sophomore in high school, I had witnessed a lot of violence. I witnessed street violence where there were stabbings, there were people getting beat down. There were shootings at like we would have quinceañeras in our neighborhood, and um, there would be get-togethers that would end up in bottle crashing and shots fired and Phoenix PD and the helicopter overhead. I witnessed some drive-bys. I was shot at myself. I think I can't really remember. It was either 12 or 13 the first time I got shot at.
Wow.
And so just grew up in kind of a tough environment on one side. And my mom did not know a lot of that stuff. And then on the other side, I had a pretty solid family unit. So it was a kind of a weird upbringing because you're getting pulled in two different directions. And yeah, and as I got into high school, my mom realized, I think, that it was a little bit messy to live down there. And by then, my stepdad was in her life, and they had decided to get married, and they had some land that was further out in the East Valley, out in an area called Queen Creek. And we moved out there my sophomore year, and so that's where I finished out. And that was a completely different environment. That's farming,
Yep.
very low population, still high Hispanic population. So I was culturally, even as a white guy, this is going to sound weird, but culturally, I was at ease because I was with who I grew up with. I was around, the Mexican culture, and I was comfortable with that. But it was weird, like not having city buses, not getting shot at, not seeing other people get shot. That was all kind of weird at that point. There was no gangs, and I remember for anybody that has worked gangs or knows gangs, one of the funniest conversations I had as a new sophomore at the new high school, a guy came up and he was like, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Well, I don't gangbang, dude." And he was like, "What?" And I said, "What?" And he's like, "Where are you from?" And I said, "I just told you I'm not a gangbanger." And he's like, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he's like, "Well, I just want to know where you came from." And I was like, oh, I came from Phoenix. Yeah, I lived in Phoenix. And he's like, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, in my neighborhood, dude, if you ask somebody where you're from, you're asking them what gang do you come from? What gang do you associate with?"
Mhm.
So that's the way I took that question. So I thought you were asking me what set was I from, to kind of you know check who I was with or where my alliances were. And he's like, "You're weird, man." And say, so that was a whole weird conversation. And finished out high school there, and um, yeah, I kind of stayed out in that area, and that's how I ended up. I know I'm at Florence now, but I was with Pinell County for 32 years prior to coming over to Florence, and so that's kind of how I ended up in that area. And at 20 years old, I hired on with the Pinell County Sheriff's Office, and I was there until 2 months ago, and retired as the second in command, and then came over to Florence to be the chief.
I really appreciate that you explained kind of the dichotomy of having on one end this like really put together unit, but then on the other end there was a lot of chaos because I relate to that. I really do. I told you a little bit offline, but my dad was gang affiliated. He was in prison, and my parents were both drug addicts, and so I had that part of my upbringing that was chaotic. And when he got out, there's a lot of domestic violence, and he was probably in and out for another decade after. But then I also was raised by my single stepdad that gave me a lot of security and love and tried his best to give me a sense of normalcy. And it was like very confusing. And on one end, like you're so grateful for the stability and the security of, having someone who has their act together and is there for you. But then on the other end, when you have all this other stuff going on, like for me, I felt really lost. Like I was so confused, kind of bouncing back and forth between the two different worlds. And so I appreciate you sharing that. And I do relate to some pieces of that. And I was laughing because you said it was weird that you weren't getting shot at. And as a young person, to have that reality of saying, wow, like my norm and what I was used to was all of this trauma and, getting shot at and experiencing all these things. And when you were separated from that, you're like, wow, it's really weird.
Yeah, it,
I
it
don't
was
have that.
and I'll give you another funny story because it becomes part of your life. You don't even realize, and
Mhm.
it's same like the cop life. You have all these mannerisms that start happening because of the job. But even then, growing up, that same guy that I had that conversation with, we kind of become friends out of that conversation and hang out because he was my first contact there, and so he was kind of new there. I was kind of new there, so we kind of hung out a little bit. And we're walking, and he's like, "What do you keep looking at?" And because about every third or fourth step, I would check my six, and I'm like, "Well, I'm just making sure nobody's coming up on us." And he's like, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, like, I don't want to get jumped, dude, and I don't know the lay of the land here yet, so I don't know who's who or what's what." And um, again, he was like, "Dude, what is wrong with you? Like, that's not normal." And I'm like, "No, it's pretty normal, dude. Like, in my neighborhood, I got jumped a few times, and it was when you were slipping, if you weren't checking around and keeping an eye on your surroundings, is when you would get got." And so just stuff like that you don't even realize that that's not normal
Hmm.
until you get out of that environment and you get into a more normal environment. And that's why, like, I have a special place in my heart for the inner city, and especially inner city kids, because a lot of them, they grow up not understanding what normal is. Their normal is all jacked up, but
Mhm.
it's it's normal to them.
Yeah, it's almost like you don't know what you don't know. And I reference this a lot in even in the context of wellness, which I know we'll talk about that in a little bit, but sometimes you don't know how bad you feel unless you know the opposite. And if you
Right.
don't know the opposite, if you don't know what good feels
Right.
like, then how are you ever to know? You know,
Right.
you have to have like two sides of the coin to understand the other. And if you only have the one perspective, it's really hard to even comprehend what's on the other side. And I'm I was kind of smiling because you said, you know, you came out of that environment, but then you went right back into a
Because it's
similar
comfortable.
environment, right? So, and you spent over 30 years in law enforcement. And
Yeah.
do you think that your childhood experience living in that environment gave you an edge as you
Oh,
entered into your career?
absolutely. Yeah. There's no doubt in my mind that the way I grew up in the circumstances I grew up in absolutely prepared me for this job. And you know, and I'm a guy of faith. And so I believe that everything was aligned for me to be where I'm at. And it, you know, it was by divine intervention because there were several times that I really should have been dead, and it didn't happen. And you know, you call it what you will, but um, I believe that my course was set from the beginning, and all of that stuff prepared me to be a better cop, and I think to be a better leader as I moved through that cop career. And you and I talked offline a little bit about the chaos, right? And being comfortable in that chaos, and that is like chaos is my jam. You know, like when there's just crazy stuff going on for me personally, everything kind of slows down, and I get a very clear picture of the problem and solutions.
Mm,
When everything's slow, I feel like ah, you know, it's very I don't know, it's counterintuitive for me to go slow or to be in slow circumstances, and it's hard to slow down because when things are going crazy is when I'm like, okay, this is my jam. And so I
yeah.
think that the childhood obviously prepared me for the career because they're both the same way.
I mean, I really believe that we are a product of our past experiences and our preconditioning. You know,
Hmm.
we learn to adapt. We are incredibly adaptable as humans. And so you were able to thrive in that environment because you have direct experience growing up in that environment.
Right.
And I would imagine that it also gave you a deeper purpose and a deeper sense of empathy and understanding for what people are going through. And I agree with you. I think about my upbringing a lot, and I've had a lot of like introspection and questions because I think when I was younger, there was a lot of like, me and my mentality was like, why? Like there was always that question, like, why did I go through that, or why was I put in that position to have to go through some of the, the hard and traumatic things that I went through, and I truly don't think that I would be here sitting here with you today if I didn't experience those things. And I think that that gave me such an ability to have um, empathy for people in those situations, to understand wellness and understand people who are struggling through situations and have like a really deeper why. And so
Yeah.
I don't know if you can relate to that too, but
Yep.
that was the thing that popped in my head. I was like, I would just imagine that you just have such a really good pulse on what people are going through.
Yeah, and it again as I entered this career, and you know, in this career, you are doing nothing but dealing with people, and
Yeah.
most of the time, you're dealing with people in their worst moments, and you know, with gangsters when I because again, I love the dangerous stuff, I love the chaos. So I, as a cop, I was attracted to that. You know, the gang stuff, the dope stuff, the high speed, low drag stuff. That's where I always wanted to be. Um, and I like that for two reasons. You know, again, I like the chaos, or that's what I was drawn to, but I also had a clear understanding of who those people were, and that there were people behind all of that. You know, and you and I talked about this. You had family members in prison. I had family members in prison. I had a cousin who was a full patch outlaw motorcycle gang member. I had an uncle that did a 27 and a half year stint in prison, and then I had a cousin that was a cop, and so we had both sides of that, and then people that I grew up with. I had of my friends that I grew up with in the neighborhood that were some of my closest friends that grew up playing soccer and stuff like that. Of those probably five friends, one of them just got out for a double murder that he committed when we were teenagers, and another two were killed. Another one was shot. One other guy is living with little, just a little bit of damage, like me. He's got some bumps and bruises, but didn't get killed or in prison. And so I grew up with the understanding of who the people were behind all this and how they get in those situations. Because I can tell you, like my buddy that went to prison for killing two people, it was two people that tried to kill him because he was from a different gang. And so he was in the wrong neighborhood at the wrong time. The wrong thing happened. And all of a sudden, he's in a situation where, he's taken somebody's life because of the gang affiliation.
Yeah.
But I don't know I don't know him as a gangster. I know him as a dude that I played soccer with. And so having that kind of framework and then getting into this career gave me the ability to not look at somebody as like an object of their circumstances, but rather the human being that's in front of me.
Yeah. I mean, what a superpower. I have a lot of conversations with leadership that ask that question of like, how do you teach that? Yeah. How do you teach someone who hasn't had that lived experience to have that emotional intelligence, to have that empathy and be able to go out in the community and, serve the people of their community without having that understanding that you just described? And I think a lot of people are kind of stumped on that question of like, how do you teach the younger guys who don't have that lived experience?
Yeah, and I don't think that's a teachable thing. That's something you have to kind of either live or immerse yourself in. Now, I think that guys in this profession or gals in this profession, and ladies, please bear with me because I'll say guys, but I mean all of us. Um, but I think people in this profession, the only way that you can get that is by working those areas. So working those high crime areas, but approaching it differently, right? Not approaching it as a robotic. This is the law, and this is black and white, and you're a violator of the law, and that's that. You have to look at it as just these are people living life, and it could be your mom and your dad. And I think if you if you program these young cops from the beginning eh, in a way that they understand that they should treat people like they would want their mom or their wife or their sister to be treated, then they'll approach it right. You know what I mean? They'll treat the person right. So if you get them in those high crime areas where this is going on, where this culture is there, but they're approaching it the right way, they can still get that immersion, and they still. And I've seen some cops do it. They didn't grow up like me, but they did a damn good job of working those type of areas because of that empathy.
Yeah, so maybe it's something that just comes with time and experience, and then having, people like you showing them the way and making them understand, like you said, treating people, it sounds so simple, treat
Right.
people how you want to be treated or how you want your family to be treated, but I know
Yeah.
that it's deeper than that. And
Yeah.
so I know that you said early in your career you were always on. You kind of just went like full on, full speed, and you maybe didn't understand the damage that that could do over time. Would you be able to explain kind of what you went through in your personal experience with that?
hmm So, what I'm referring to there is essentially, like I said, I loved the chaos, right? I love the high speed, low drag stuff, and so narcs, undercover, SWAT, the gangs, all that stuff is the high speed, low drag stuff. But you have to really be on, right? You have to be on your game because that's where you get hurt or killed, or your partners get hurt or killed. And so loved working that stuff, loved being in it. And but by being in it, you're in chaos all the time. So you are always switched on because you are always having to watch your surroundings. You're always having to pay closer attention. You're always watching your back. And so, even what I described as a teenager, right? Just constantly looking over your shoulder. And I had this experience at my house, and I explained this, what I'm about to explain to you. I explained this to a normal person, and they're like, "Oh my God, like, why? Who thinks like that?" And I said, "Well, I do. Yeah, I mean, it's normal for me. I don't know why you don't understand it." So I went out to my trash can one day to get my trash can, and my son was out there. And as I got to my trash can out in front of my house, I realized, fuck, sorry, uh, I don't have my gun. And
Mm.
so I was like, I said, I felt, and I was like, I don't have my gun with me. So I look back at the house and I look at my son, and he's playing football with a neighbor. And then a car pulls up, and it's a car that I don't recognize, and it stops short of my house. And a dude gets out and he's looking at me, and I'm like, shit, I don't have my gun and I don't have cover. I'm out in the middle of the street. And so I kind of get behind the trash can, and he's like, "You're the guy that lives here?" And I'm like, "Oh man." So I'm thinking this is going south, and I have nothing. And I'm in flip flops to boot. So just as non tactical as it could be. And I start to position the trash can between he and I, because I figure, well, I'm going to use this as a blocking mechanism to get some ground and get between him and my son. And so I start making that plan in my head, and I start acting on that plan. And then he starts walking towards me, and I'm, racking my brain, like, who is this guy? How have I interacted with him? Blah, blah, blah. And he pulls out a set of keys, and he's like, I found these keys in the mailbox and they have your address. And I was like, oh, yeah, 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 yeah. Those are my keys, man. I'm sorry. And so I recognized the keys. He gave me the keys, and he's like, all right, have a nice day. And so for me, that was a very intense moment. And it was more intense because I felt so unprepared. And I'm a guy that always prepares, right? And always on. And when I explain that whole scenario to a normal person, they are like, "What is wrong with you?" Like, nobody plans a tactical retreat from a trash can in their front yard. And I'm like, "Well, yeah, we kind of do, if you're built like this, and if you do these kind of things." And so, tell that story because that kind of gives listeners an idea of what being on all the time means. Like, when you
Right.
go home, you drive home, and if I see a car follow me for more than two turns, I'm making evasive maneuvers now, and I'm trying to figure out, are they tailing me, and who is it, and can I flip the script where I can get a plate, and all that kind of stuff. And so there's all these things that you do. And so, being like that, what I didn't realize is that over time, that has a significant effect on your body. And physiologically, you start to have things happen to you that are really out of your control, because it's the way we are built as humans. And so, fight or flight, most people are familiar with that. So you are literally in fight or flight mode all the time. And, more so fight, because you're constantly preparing for that. And so you're constantly in that fight mode, which causes cortisol, it
Mhm.
causes adrenaline dumps. And so it causes these things that, again, physiologically mess with your body. And as I went through time, I got to a point, this was probably about a decade ago, where a doctor said, "Hey, you're pre diabetic, you have high blood pressure." And I'm like, dude, pre diabetic, bro. Like, I lift weights, I run, I'm in good shape, I eat pretty healthy, like, I eat pretty clean. I'm not a sweet fanatic or anything like that. What are you talking about?
Mhm.
And he's like, "Nah, it's not that kind of diabetic. Like, this is more your genetics, and this is more your pancreas." And so I realized that that was a direct result of our career and being switched on. And then I had these weird um, heart palpitations going on that I could not figure out. And that was all associated with blood pressure, and was all associated with my caffeine intake, which is another thing in this career, right? And
Mhm.
so, yeah, all of all of that being on all the time, I started to see the physiological results of that. And that's not even including the mental stuff, right? That's just what's going on with my body, um, that I that was medical stuff. And then, the mental stuff was a whole different thing.
Yeah. Do you think that that was a turning point for you? Do you think that that was kind of a wake up call to understanding what this job can do to you and maybe what holistic wellness looks like. Because, to your point, I talk to a lot of people that are the same way. They're like, I'm really fit, I lift weights, and maybe don't understand all of the other stuff that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And do you think that that opened up your eyes and made you take different actions or different
Hmm.
steps in your
Yeah,
wellness?
it absolutely was a turning point for me because when I got that wake up call, the pre-diabetic thing was a big thing for me because I was like,
Yeah.
dude, because I've watched family members who have lost legs, who've lost eyesight, so I'm thinking diabetes, and then I'm thinking, oh my God, I got to take shots, and all this stuff is going through your mind. And my doctor said, look, man, we're going to work to your pre-diabetic. So we're going to work our butts off together to keep you pre-diabetic so that we can extend this as long as possible. But without a doubt, there's going to be a point where you turn diabetic because of the way the pancreas works. And he essentially explained to me, he says, your pancreas is like a battery. When it starts losing charge, you can't recharge it. It consistently starts losing that. And then, you'll become diabetic and you'll have to deal with that accordingly.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of a slap in the face for me because here I am, doing what I think is the right things to do, which is working out and staying fit and eating kind of healthy. I'm thinking that's the key. And then when I get slapped in the face with that, and I actually start looking into it and diving into how to stay healthier than that, because heart attacks was another one with the palpitations. I was a little freaked out, right? Because the palpitations, if you haven't had them, I have PACs and PVCs are the two types, and I have both. And when you have those, the PVCs were the ones that the doctor, because I had a heart specialist, and when I got into the PVCs, I would tell him I'd be on a monitor and I'd be like, "There's one," and he's like, "Yep, there's one, yep, there's one, yep," and he's like, "I can't believe you're feeling those. Those are typical people can't feel those. Everybody has them, and they kind of are there, but people can't typically feel those." And I said, "Well, mine are pretty strong, and I can feel them." And so when I started learning about those too, right, it's all stress related. And the weird thing in this career is the stress is it's different, right? There's cumulative, there's acute,
Hmm.
there's all these different kind of stressors, and you don't understand how they wear on you and how they wear on your body. And I dove into my wellness a lot more. I dove into how can I fight this back because once I started getting this information, I was like, oh hell no, like I'm not going out like this, and I'm gonna fight back on this. And so
Yeah.
that's where I really started pushing back, and a lot of it was was quite selfish. I don't want people to think that although I am a big proponent of wellness and resiliency, and I try to teach the younger officers and I want them to be better. A lot of it was selfish because I was trying to fix myself. And so I was learning all this stuff to try and fix myself. And then I learned as I went through that, what I learned was when you talk about this with somebody, if you confide in another cop, and then you confide in another cop and then another cop, and all of a sudden you figure out like, holy shit, everybody is dealing with this and nobody's talking about it. And so I figured I'll be the guy that talk about it. So
Hmm.
uh,
I think that I think that the word selfish gets such a bad rap sometimes. I think that it's okay to be selfish. And I think that sometimes you do have to focus on yourself in order to be able to provide that education and knowledge and be able to talk to other people about those things. Like sometimes it's almost the oxygen mask, analogy of like,
right, put
like
yours
maybe,
on first.
yeah, maybe some people find that selfish, but other people find that to be necessary, and so I think that, um, what I've learned working, in this space is that you are all incredibly selfless, right? Like you want to help everybody else. Like that is the main objective is to, serve everybody else and you forget about yourselves. And the irony of it is that you can't serve everybody else and show up as the best version of yourself and do the best job if you're not first,
Right.
prioritizing yourself. I do find it really interesting that you found that everybody, not everybody, but a lot of
Right.
people were experiencing similar things in silence. And I do think that we tend to do that. I think it's human nature. I also think that, law enforcement historically has been that way, right? You were kind of brought up in that, shove it down, don't talk about it, suck it
Mm.
up type mentality. But um, I think that we all want to feel quote unquote normal. We all want to fit in. We don't want people to perceive us a certain way or to look down on us in a certain way. But I do think that there's so much strength in talking about these things and connecting with people. And um, there's strength in that vulnerability to talk about it.
Yeah, I would agree with you, and I think that obviously I feel that my age has something to do with that too, right? As you age, and as you gain tenure in this position or in this career, um, you start to this will sound horrible, but it's not meant this way. You start to give less shits about what other people think, and so you get to a place where you're like, look, I don't care if somebody likes me, dislikes me, thinks I'm weak or thinks I'm strong. I know who I am, right? And I know how I'm made. I know the things I've been through, and I know the life I've lived. And I know that a lot of these people couldn't have made it through my childhood. So it doesn't matter to me that they feel a certain way about me. What I know is that I feel that because of my life, the culmination of my life and my career, that I have some valuable input for somebody out there, right? That may be going through the same thing. And I also understand that because of my position, because I'm in a position of authority in the cop world, and B, because of how I've come up and the things that I've done, I know that I carry a certain level of I, respect. Sounds bad because it's again it sounds kind of self-serving, but that people understand that I am about what I'm about, right? That I'm not some fake dude who hasn't done anything, and I'm just trying to make a go out of that. They
Right.
understand that I'm a real deal dude. I've done some real deal stuff, and so I think when I talk about this stuff, that it has some bearing on them and it carries a little more weight for them.
Well, I think that people want to know that there's authenticity behind what you're saying.
Right.
And so I think that people are gravitated towards that, towards people who have that lived experience
Mm.
and who, know what they're talking about. I say this all the time because I believe it. Like, I would never take financial advice from someone who is in debt and terrible at their finances, right? And so
Right.
why would I take advice from someone when it comes to wellness or leadership or whatever who maybe doesn't have that lived experience or hasn't had success in that area? So I
Right.
think that it makes total sense to, come from a space of I have experience. I'm willing to talk about it. I know who I am. I'm living authentically. And I do agree with you. I think that as you get older, you kind of stop caring as much. I remember seeing old grannies, right? And they were always just kind of middle fingers to the sky, didn't really care, like a little bit grumpy maybe, but just whatever. You kind of reach
Right.
this point where whatever, I don't care. And I'm starting to get that way, and I've never been that way. And there's something freeing about it.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
There's a word that I've been trying to live by lately, and it's emboldened, being
Mm.
bold. And I've never been that way. I've always been very timid. I've always been a people pleaser, I think from my childhood, just learning that and always had a lot of self-worth stuff and always scared of, and wanting people to like me. And I still want people to I think everyone wants people to like them. I don't think you
Right.
want to
Right.
walk through life and feel like everyone hates
No.
you.
Yeah,
Um,
they'd be a liar if they say they didn't. Yeah.
right. But I do think that you start to build that confidence in yourself of this is who I am. And you are never, ever gonna get approval from everybody. It's
Right.
never
Right.
gonna happen. It's a forever losing battle.
But
And
I think as you age, what happens is you stop looking for that approval, right? I think as a younger adult, you're still seeking that approval, even though because I can tell you, like me, I haven't given a shit for a long time, like since I was a kid, and I've always kind of cut my own path. and everybody's like, "Hey, we have to go this way because the rules say so." And I'm like, "Fuck that way. We're going this way because I think this is what I want to do, and I don't care what you guys think, and I don't mind being the odd duck out." And 9 times out of 10, this was a much funner way, anyways. And so I've been like that a lot. So I, but at the same time, as a youngster, I would do that. But a lot of that, I think, was designed specifically to draw people in to say like this guy's different, and so you are still going for that like me effect, right? And that's
Yeah,
just a natural thing as a human.
I can see that for sure. Um, I wanted to maybe talk a little bit about how this job impacted your home life. This is a conversation that comes up a lot, and I hear this home life balance and the importance of home wellness. And you've been married for a long time, and I'm curious how that impacted your relationship with your wife, your kids. Maybe give us some of your experiences, but also like how did you keep it together for so long?
Oh, it was great. It's all been great, no problems. I wouldn't attribute my success to me keeping anything together. I would truly attribute my success to probably my oldest daughter. She and her and I have had this conversation as she's gotten older, and she's 33 now, and so her and my wife are the two that I attribute our family staying together, because those two, um, like I told my oldest daughter, I said, "I'm sorry you got like the worst version of dad," but that's just the way it was because I was a young, aggressive, hard-headed cop. Um, Again, I loved chaos. I loved being around chaos. I was always switched on. So she got the worst version of dad because of that, right? Because she was the one where I missed the most of her life.
Mm,
I missed the most of her school get-togethers, her birthday parties, or everything had to be on this alternate schedule. So she had to adjust her life around what was normal for everybody else. And so her and again my wife being uh quite frankly, I think she's again, I think God lines things up the way they're supposed to be, and has been the yin to my yang because she's very calm. She's very quiet, introvert, which is not what I am. And so she was my solitude. She was my rock. She kind of kept me steady. And I could come home and I could be in the worst mood, snap, lose my shit over, the simplest stuff with my kids. And she would calm all that down, and she would ensure that I calm down, and then she would go make sure that the kids understood like dad's not mad at you, dad's stressed out or whatever the deal is.
yeah.
So the job caused a lot of that in the earlier years, and then as I moved on, we had our second daughter, and she got a little bit better version of dad, but I was still a lot switched on. And then my son's a senior this year, and so he's the youngest, and he probably got the best version of dad because this last decade, which were really some of his formative years as a young man, he got the most calm and collected version of dad because I had kind of come over that hill, and even though I was still involved in his early childhood, I was still involved in some of the high speed, low drag stuff. It was at a different level because now I was either like a team leader or I was in charge of our SWAT team or doing motors as a supervisor, that type of stuff. So he saw a different version of dad. So they all had these throughout my 32 years. Each almost like each decade was a different version of me, and through that, as probably about midway through that, is where my wife kind of gave me a reality check, right? And that was a turning point for me with my children when she explained to me that my oldest daughter was afraid of me and explained like why that was, right? And then my wife would always have these cues for me after that. She would, if I started acting a certain way, she'd be like, "We're not suspects. Stop talking to us like that."
Mhm.
And so she was reminding me that because what would happen is at home, if a problem popped up, I would start dealing with it like I dealt with problems on the street. And that does not work for family,
Right.
right? And a lot of times it doesn't work for suspects, but you're just trying to solve a problem. And so as you start learning that and you start applying better tactics for the home life, that ends up working out. And then vice versa, when you start taking those home life lessons and applying them to the street, you find out it works a little bit better that way too.
Yeah. I'm really curious when you were talking, do you think that you looked for chaos in your home life? Because you had mentioned before that you were really comfortable in that, but then when things were peaceful and quiet and slow, that's when you were uncomfortable. Do you think that there was a level of almost trying to find chaos within your home life to find that
Um,
comfortability within yourself?
I don't know. I would say I don't think that was a constant, but I get what you're saying, and I don't doubt that subconsciously, yes, you
Mm,
look for that. But I because to me, home was always kind of the place of solitude, right? So I that's where I could just kind of come home and be like, "Phew, all right,
yeah.
now I can recover from all of the all day long. And it's weird because I explained to my wife, I and probably people watching this would assume I'm an extrovert, but if you look at the actual definition, I'm not. I'm an introvert. Like when I get done with this interaction, I'll be exhausted, and
Mm.
I could go and stare at a blank wall for an hour just to regenerate, right? And so it was the same at work because I was in that chaos. I was comfortable in that, but it's a lot of stuff coming at you, and you're making a lot of decisions and interacting with a lot of people. And then I would come home and I would just want to veg out. So that there was two states of me being at home. There was the vegging out and totally disconnected from everything going on, or there was the switched on, which had everybody on edge in my house. Then I didn't even know that I was putting them on edge. I thought everybody else was the asshole. And then you start paying attention and you're like, oh, wait a minute. It's me. It's not them.
It's a very humbling experience to realize that. And I've had
Yeah.
that too, where you're so busy like pointing your fingers at the world that you
Hmm.
don't realize that you're the problem sometimes. And that level of self-reflection and self-assessment sometimes is really grounding and humbling.
Yeah.
And um, I've definitely had to say apologies multiple times with my tail between my legs of, oh, I see it now. I
Yeah.
see that I was the one who was causing this. You had said that each decade you had gotten maybe a little bit better,
Yeah.
and the last decade was maybe your best. What changed? What were some things that you did maybe in this last decade to prioritize yourself or your wellness that helped you to show up as a better partner, as a better father?
I think so. Part of it would have probably been my oldest daughter and, watching her go through relationships with men
Mhm.
and how she was being treated and just horrible relationships. She picked horrible dudes. And then I had the epiphany that it's my fucking fault. Like she's picking what she's used to. And I created chaos and yelling and screaming and all of that stuff. And so I had conditioned her
Wow.
to be used to that. And I was like, holy shit. And so that became, kind of a pivotal moment for me. Like, oh my God, I don't think I realized how much I influenced the future of my kids. Right. So that was one big thing. And that was in discussions with my daughter and my wife, them being really honest and brutally honest with me, and me being willing to hear the feedback for what it was. Right, it was done out of love. It's not to attack, and they wanted a better version of me. So, kind of working through all that, and then, like I said, the medical stuff as I started noticing physiological stuff, and then I started noticing even mental stuff. Like I had never ever been claustrophobic, and all of a sudden, I getting on an elevator or a plane was like it took a lot, and I'm sitting there thinking like, dude, what the fuck? Like I'll run into a gunfight, but I can't get on an elevator
Mm,
without freaking out. and the doors close, and all of a sudden I would find myself doing combat breathing to calm myself down, just to go up 2 flights and get off the elevator. And I was like, what is going on? So all that stuff started happening. And so as you're trying to work through that, and again, you're working through it by yourself, because there's no way I'm going to tell anybody as a SWAT cop in charge of a SWAT team that I'm afraid of an elevator,
Right.
you know, and the planes too. And so, there was just all this stuff, the medical stuff, the mental stuff, the input from family, where I was like, dude, I this is not who I want to be or how. And I was like, I'm gonna die some grumpy old man asshole all by myself because I pushed my family away, all my friends away, and I've seen it happen before, right, with some of the older cops.
Mhm.
And I'm like, there's no way I'm not gonna be that dude. I got to change this. And again, the realization of it's me, it's not everybody else. And so I've got to change this, and I've got to start working on it. And then it was just a matter of kind of figuring that all out. And again, you do it by yourself because you're not willing to talk to anybody else about that unless you have. I had one really good friend that is my hunting partner, and he knows who he is, and we spent some good quality time together. And there was a point where he was like, bro, you need help. And I was like, what? And nothing was going on, like we were just having a normal hangout. And he's like, you need help. And I'm like, hell, what are you talking about? And he's like, nah, dude, I got a lady and you need to go see her. You need a psychiatrist or a psychologist, one of the two, um, to talk to, and you need one that's specific to law enforcement. And he says, I have a lady and you need to go talk to her because I recognize exactly where you are because I was there.
Mm.
And having him as kind of a mentor really helped my progress forward in the mental health arena, because when he was willing to tell me that, like, I was where you are, and I was like, so you deal with like this and this, and he's like, yep. And then I had another buddy who was a top tier military guy, and he was doing way cooler shit than I could ever do. And I had conversations with him where, and one of the conversations I remember distinctly, where I called him and I was like, hey, dude, are you ever, and again, this is a dude that has done like shit that movies have been made about, literally. And I'm like, are you ever driving and like you start crying for no reason? And he starts laughing. He's like, yeah, bro. He says, I just did that the other day. And I'm like, uh, so like it's normal? And he goes, well, it's normal for us. Yeah. And he said, this is why. And he kind of was like, just keep working through it, man. And so having those conversations, and having, so telling you that because that's why I feel obligated, right? Because I know there are some dudes that I have influence with, and ladies, you're included in that, that I have influence with. And so I knew how much it meant to me to have somebody that I respected say, hey, man, it's all good. It's normal for us. And here's what you need. And so, yeah, that was I was kind of all over the place on that
No, I
one.
really liked it. I think that we covered a few things. So one is having the ability to take ownership over your role in situations, and the power of talking about things. It sounds so simple and it's so hard for all of us to do, right? And I really truly believe that conversations can save lives. I
Oh,
think
yeah.
that the hardest thing is feeling alone and isolated in your experience, and to have that one person, like you said, that isn't weak, that
Mhm.
you look up to, saying, I feel that too. Like, how powerful is that, and how much weight does that take off of a person who feels like they're broken or alone or no one else is feeling those things. And so I
Right.
truly do believe that conversations can save lives. And the more we talk about these things, the more normal they become. And I like how
Yeah.
he said it's normal for us,
Right.
because I do think that maybe there's a level of understanding that the general public would never have to that. And so if you are talking to someone maybe who isn't in law enforcement or who hasn't experienced some of your lived experiences, they might look at you like you're totally not normal. And so
Right.
I do think that talking to people who have some of those same shared experiences to tell you it's okay, it's normal, is a really big deal.
Yeah, for sure. And it was a huge deal for me because it really because I was comfortable, obviously, talking to him about that kind of stuff, and we had obviously had some of those kind of conversations before. But that was a very reaffirming moment for me when he said, that he's dealt with the exact same thing. I'm like, dude, okay, like on the scale of badass dudes, like you're here and I'm here, and if you're dealing with it, then
I'm
okay,
good.
I can handle this. Yeah,
You had mentioned to me, and I want to talk a little bit about mental wellness and some of the things that have worked for you and that you're an advocate for. But you said that you want to return your people to their families better than you got them, not worse. And
yeah,
I know that wellness is something that's a priority to you. I know that you are comfortable talking about the things that you've gone through. And
mhm,
um, I really appreciated when we talked offline, and I told you this before, but the confidence that you had to be like, I know I'm not weak.
right,
Like I know I can do my job really well,
mhm,
and I do these things, and I've experienced these things.
right,
And there was so much strength in that conversation. And afterwards, I was like, yeah, like I felt like amped after our first conversation because, previous to us, talking on the phone for what, a couple minutes before
mhm,
the podcast, I've seen you around, I've known you, but I didn't know you. And
right,
like some of the things that you said, I was like, wow, like I really respect that. And I think that we need to have more of those conversations of
mhm.
like, hey, like I know who I am, I know that I'm not weak, and here are the things that have helped me. So, from a mental perspective, what are some of the things that you've done and that you're an advocate for?
Oh man, we're gonna go all over the place here. But yeah. So I guess I'll start with seeing a shrink, right? That was one of the biggest steps was going and seeing a counselor specific to law enforcement because I tried the typical EAP whatever counselor, and that is a horrible experience for any so and I would include military, any military person or cop, and probably even firefighters. I mean, they're second responders, but whatever. Um, but even the firefighters, because we deal with a different world, you have to have somebody that understands that world. And I remember my first counseling session, like it didn't matter that I had a gun on me, right? That was one of the questions, but it wasn't a disqualifying question. But at a normal place, get out. Like you ain't showing up to a counselor with a gun, but they understand in our world that that's something psychological for us. So going to a counselor was a big one. And then as I worked through that, that was probably my first step, and that was a result of that first conversation with my hunting buddy of, hey, go see her, she'll help you out, and starting getting help there. And then I think the next piece of my mental health journey was opening up to my wife and letting her know, like, hey, so there's all this shit that I haven't told you, and it's gonna get me a little emotional, but there's all these things that you don't know, and I want to kind of lay it out. Excuse me, sorry.
Okay.
And so opening up to her and kind of inviting her into a world that I thought I was protecting her from, right? Just because I didn't want to expose her to the same shit that I was dealing with, and so opening up to her was pretty liberating because here is the person who has been my closest best friend and knows everything about me, right? Knows all the deep dark secrets of living together for 30 something years, and she's the person that I'm not sharing with the most, right? So that was a big step in the mental health piece was opening up to her and inviting her into this shit show in my brain, and having her. be a partner as we move forward through it. And then I guess next would have been at work. Sheriff Lamb and I were big. We want to try new stuff, and whatever's out there, we want to take a look at it. And then we are the kind of leaders that we're not going to ask anybody to do some stuff that we haven't vetted first, because I wouldn't expect them to go through it and be the guinea pig. I always felt like that was my job. And so we jumped into the brain performance stuff through Heal the Heroes, which is a nonprofit. And we went through some of the brain performance stuff, which is essentially the easiest way to explain it is it's these it's the theta beta wave that you're listening to combined with flashes of lights that go into your eyes, right? And it has this effect of repairing your brain from the just the exposure to trauma. The I had been on the SWAT team. I'd never been diagnosed with TBIs, but back in the day when we were doing what's called explosive entries, when we were blowing doors open to go into houses, we literally had no standoff like you're supposed to. So that it was a bomb tech wrapping det cord around a door. And so he would just wrap the shit out of it with 110 grain and blow it. And we were like 6 inches from it. And so we were essentially getting blown up, right? So I knew I had stuff going on from that, that I had been concussed, over and over again from all that stuff. And so the baton, or not baton, well, it was Batania and Heal the Hero. We went through that program, and that was my next step. And I saw so each one of these I saw some level of improvement, right? Whether it was behavior, sleep was a big one. I saw some level of improvement, and I saw. And then getting feedback from my family, quite frankly, and them seeing differences in me, right? And so after going through that, my next venture was probably the biggest leap, and that was ketamine and getting ketamine treatment, which is still taboo in the cop world in a lot of places. Arizona, I think we are very ahead of the game as it relates to law enforcement and the ground we're willing to cut that nobody else is. And so uh, I kind of fought the battle. I knew I wanted to do ketamine, and again, a different guy that I had been introduced to and got to know a little bit. I got to sit down with him while he was doing some skydiving and stuff in our county, and we started talking about mental health. And he's another dude that, on the scale of badasses, he's at the very top of that, right? And he's a top tier military guy. And we had a conversation about the hallucinogenics, and he kind of told me his story and all the trauma that he had dealt with from childhood on, and how the hallucinogenics fixed a lot of that, and brought up and addressed trauma that he didn't even know he had, right?
Mhm.
And so it was that all of that was very interesting to me. So I started looking into it, and of course the cop in you is like, ah, these dudes just want to do dope, right? They just want to do drugs legally. And so that's your instinctual reaction, and I think that's the problem in our profession is the old heads. That's their instinct is like, oh, this is just some BS way of using drugs. And so I had to fight through that, and I had to do some research. And then I looked, and I finally reached a point where I was like, I'm doing this. Like I can see how, and these guys, these are dudes that integrity is everything for them, right? And so when these guys tell me something and they stand behind it, I'm all in on that
Yeah.
because I trust them so much. And so um, I was in on this ketamine ride, and then I started. I worked for Mark, so I went to Mark Sheriff Lamb, and I said, "Hey, dude, I want to try this thing," and he's like, "Cool, let's do it." And so I was like, "So I might get revoked by our governing board because they still consider it drug use," and I said, "Because of who they are and how they operate, they if they find out, they may suspend my certification, so I can't be a cop anymore." He says, I'm not going to let that happen, and we'll deal with that when we get to it. But you're safe here, like I got you." And I was like, "All right, cool." So I got there were scholarships available, and of course, the firefighters were already doing it, and they were allowed to do it. Um, and so we have the 100 Club here in Arizona, and they give kind of wellness scholarships essentially for this stuff. And so I got a scholarship through the 100 Club, and but part of that scholarship is you have to have some skin in the game, so you're required to put a fairly, in our world, a good deposit down, right? So it's I think it's about a 10% deposit, and this is about a $5,000 venture, and so you have to put 10% down to get this scholarship. And so I put in for it, and I'm willing to do all that. And again, this has been a long road here. And so the doctor reaches out to me, and they tell me, hey, the doctor wants to talk to you. And the doctor says, hey, I'm going to cover that fee for you. Don't worry about that. And I'm like, well, why would you do that? And he says, because I understand what it means to have you go through this program,
Wow.
because of who you are and your rank, who you are, and the influence that you have on the industry. And I was like, wow, man, that's really nice. And he's like, oh, believe me, you're gonna move the needle. So we need to get this done. And I said, all right. So we do it. And the cool thing was, we have a very good post director who has actually just been named the chief of Phoenix. And Matt is a very calculated guy when it comes to decision making, and he's not hasty. And he will hear you out. So I explained all of this to him, and I explained to him, what I was going to do, why I was going to do it, and ultimately, our post board reached a point where they said, "Hey, it's none of our business. It's a medical thing, right?" So I go ahead and I do the ketamine, and it was the best experience of my life and the worst experience, because it made me absolutely sick every time I did it. So if people don't know, when you do this microdosing of ketamine, there's some of us that get like nauseated sick. And so it felt like I was, I don't know, I get motion sickness. So it felt like I was on a ship at sea and had just gotten off that ship at sea. And so I was just nauseated, tired, sick to my stomach. It made me, dry heave, all that stuff. So horrible after effects, right after treatment. But um, as I went through it in 6 sessions total, and as I finished it up, I was like, oh my God. And then, my wife told me, like, you're a different person. Like, I barely recognize who you are now after going through that. And so ketamine was kind of my final thing that I stepped through, and I became an advocate of it. And again, obviously I talk openly about it, which is frowned upon in some of our realm of law enforcement, but I really don't give a shit, because if I had a lieutenant, um, from an agency that I talked to, and we had this discussion before it was kind of more accepted in our state, and he said, "Man, I'm so glad, like, you told me this, and I'm so glad that you're pushing for this." He said, because I did it like illegally, like when it wasn't condoned yet. And he said it was because he was suicidal. And he
Mm.
says, I was on the verge of killing myself, and my wife recognized everything that was going on, and she forced me, because she knew about it. She forced me to go to this, and he said it saved my life. And I said, well, I wasn't that bad, but dude, yeah. So that was kind of it. That was a very long, I know, explanation of all those, but that was the ride.
I think that the question that we have to ask is, what is the goal? Like, what is the result that we're trying to achieve? And I talk about this a lot. And this can be in the context of so many different things, like in the wellness space. But if the goal is to, like you said, to provide the resources so that you can return people back to their families better than you got them, if it's to save lives, if it's to improve mental wellness, to um, provide resources that are effective. I think sometimes we get so caught up in what the training method is or what that tool is rather than really focusing on the end result. And we call it sometimes, like in my world, it's like the vacation. Like you want to think about like what is the best case scenario, and you think about your vacation, and it's like you're so excited to be on the beach and you're with your family or whatever. Like that's what we want to focus on, like someone feeling better is that vacation. The steps that it takes to get there are sometimes not the important thing. And I think we get so like caught up in that where people are like, this is good or this is bad. But if that is going to, and I hope this is making sense, this is clocking because I know it's like
Mm.
later, but if ketamine is going to save someone's life, if
Yeah.
ketamine is going to achieve that end result of making you a happier, more whole person, if it's going to help you to deal with that cumulative trauma, then why does it matter so much? You know, it's like,
Yeah.
why is there so much of a um, stigma on the method when the results are there, when the
Well,
end result is achievable? Does that
and
make
I
sense?
it makes absolute
Okay.
sense.
Am I getting there?
I think it's because we've been so institutionalized, right?
Mhm.
These are the walls and these are the parameters, and we have to stay within that. We can't go outside of that. But then all of a sudden you get somebody that's like, why? Like why can't we go outside of that? I don't understand. Well, because it's a rule. Well, who made the fucking rule and why? Why do we have that rule? And
Mhm.
so that's where I was with this. I was like, what? Why is this illegal? And so I used the example on ketamine when I was asking these questions. I said, let me ask you something as we're talking about this. You're telling me that if a doctor prescribes this to me and I'm under the care of that doctor and he prescribes it and administers it while I'm under his care, that that's illegal. Yes, because that's a Schedule 1 drug. Okay. So operating on that premise, I was in a street fight. I got my nose busted and it busted a blood vessel and they gave me medical grade cocaine to restrict those blood vessels so they could then go in and cauterize my nose. So I had medical grade cocaine administered to me by a doctor under his care while I was undergoing surgery for my nose. And I said, so would I get, in trouble for that? Well, no. What's the difference?
Right.
Explain to me what the difference is. And so it was those conversations where people started having those light bulbs go off and say, shit, that's right. Because the problem is they can't see mental health, right? So I didn't have blood coming out of my ears, and I wasn't dripping out craziness. And so it's not something tangible for them. So when you talk about healing mental health problems, or when you talk about addressing that stuff,
Mhm.
or even just trying to maintain, because that became the goal for Sheriff Lamb and I, and it continues for me as I move forward as the chief of Florence. The goal became to not treat this stuff after it has piled up is just to constantly address it as we go through it. And what I know as a leader, and I'll say this to all police leaders out there, if you have an officer who is mentally healthy, physically healthy, and has stability, your ROI to the community is at the top tier because you are giving the community the best product you can because that officer is healthy. They're hopefully financially healthy because you've guided them in those ways. They're mentally healthy, they're physically healthy, which all equals that they have a good home life because of those things. It all carries over.
Yeah.
And then you have a better officer on the street. And so when you start looking at it in that sense, uh, as a CEO of a police organization, it only makes sense that I have to be vested in this whole fight and that I have to stand behind it.
Yeah, no, I really like that. And I agree. Like we say this all the time that it's easier to stay fit than to get fit.
Yeah,
And I think that right now is such a perfect opportunity to influence the younger generation and new people who are coming into this profession with those resources because we know that those maybe didn't exist previously. And so you have
right.
a whole generation, um, you have a lot of generations, that didn't have the ability to work in real time and to offload those things and be more proactive. And it was a very much reactive state of being, right? That
Right.
you're only addressing issues when there are issues. And so having that ability to be proactive, to offload those things, I think it's an incredible opportunity now that there's more of that awareness and more of the conversation. My final question to you, and I'll let you take the floor if you miss anything, but in the context of influencing the younger generation, what words of wisdom would you share with someone who's earlier in their career? Maybe something that you wish you would have known earlier or something that's helped you along the way.
Get out now. No, I'm just kidding. Totally kidding. We need as many good people as possible. I think the probably the best advice, and I'm horrible at doing this on the fly with the advice stuff because you think of all the great answers, and you hear other people give great answers, but I think the best advice that I could give is just to be as true to yourself as possible. Like this whole discussion, the whole time we've been talking, I've kind of discussed like my evolution through life, and how I had to get to a point where I was being more true to myself, which created those breakthroughs. So I think as these young guys and gals get into this career, they have to be true to themselves. They have to understand what the career is. They have to know the pitfalls. They have to really be a master of their craft. So, knowing, researching, and understanding all of that, and then being the best cop you can be, but also being the best mother, father, brother, son, daughter, all that stuff, and balancing all of that, and not being afraid to be open about that stuff. You know what I mean? And not to be afraid to talk about the fact that yeah, I'm a 1 year cop and I haven't done a lot, but I still go to a counselor because I don't want to be in a bad spot, right? And taking those preventative measures. So yeah, I don't know if that made sense, but that would kind of be it.
I love it. No, I appreciate your time so much. And I know that we covered a lot, and I feel like we could talk for another hour. But I want to give you the floor. If there's anything I missed, any final thoughts that you want to add before we sign off?
Oh man, I don't know. I don't feel like we missed a lot. We talked about a whole lot. I really appreciate all that you're doing, Paige, because I know that you and I have gotten to know each other a lot better, and I know uh, people, you and people like you, um, are not as appreciated as you should be because you are fighting this battle for all the right reasons, and you have no dog in the fight, which makes it really cool because you haven't been a cop, right? And but you're still fighting this fight for us because you understand what it means. So I'm very appreciative uh, for you and those like you, and I would like to publicly say that so that we can let all your listeners and followers know how great you are. And I think that I would also say to any of those out there that think they can help in this realm, but don't think they're either qualified or that they're an outsider. Don't do that to yourself because you're the people that we need. You really are the people that we need because you reconnect us with humanity, whether you realize it or not.
Thank you. That means a lot to me, honestly. It really does. And, I appreciate all that you do. And my hope is that people will hear this and will, one, recognize the importance of conversation and talking about these things and vulnerability, especially vulnerability in leadership. I think it's
Yeah.
so powerful. And maybe challenging our thought processes a little bit and asking ourselves why. I think that that's such a powerful question to ask in any situation that we're in is why, like, why are we doing it this way? Why has it always been done this way? And is there a better way to do things? Can we continue to improve ourselves and, your organization, and can we keep moving the ball forward? So I appreciate you so much. And I know we'll run into each other again at some point
Yep.
around town. So thank you.
Absolutely.